Welcome everyone b'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Egan Shir, like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Smith Shlita on bracha al Pasha and Shtana, when bread is no longer Hamotzi. Today's shir is Nidnas Rav Reuven Wolf, Lili Nishmas Aviv, Rav Shmuel ben Rav Reuven, Tchon Bracha, Yertzat Ches Shvat, and Shmos Tzura B'Tzara Chaim. To have the great sponsor in a shir called Egan Shir Torah at 718-851-8651, email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
Someone asked me recently, he's traveling and it's going to be hard for him to wash and bench, and he wants to have a normal breakfast. Is there any way to have a bread that's really halacha qualified to be a mezainis and ala michya? And he's wondering about, let's say, he suggested maybe French toast. Is there any way to make French toast or something like that that would be a brei min and mezainis? So the question was about taka, what's the bracha on French toast? Is it always a matzoh lechem in aretz? And then once we looked into that, there's the question about Challah kugel. Someone asked, they heard that it could be have to wash on kneidlach. That was really surprising to him. And we'll try to talk about the newest shilas of garlic nuts and melba toast and bagel chips, and we'll soon see others. But the common denominator for this morning is that it's a bread. Officially it's a bread or it's a matzoh. When does a bread or a matzoh lose its hamotzi lechem in the aretz? In other words, the assumption is that bread and matzah, of course, is hamotzi. When does that bracha change? When you do something to it, when does the bracha go from hamotzi to brei min and mezainis? So let me give you a little more gishmak, a little more clarity. Just a few weeks ago, we was able to talk about the Challah on the bracha on bagels. And actually, if someone would only cook a bagel dough, he would never bake it, the bracha would be a brei min and mezainis. Why? Because the aleph of hamotzi is baking. Baking makes something hamotzi. So there we see something interesting, that it never became bread because you didn't bake it, you cooked it. Today we're going to talk about the opposite Challah. When it was made into bread, when it was made into a matzah, when does a bread or a matzah lose a matzoh lechem in aretz? In other words, Challah kugel was bread, matzah brei was matzah, and French toast was bread. Is this process that you did enough to change its bracha? So first we have to realize that these type of shalos should not be taken lightly. I mean, those shalos should be taken lightly, but this one has 4 nafkaminas that negeya almost every time. For example, if you're really supposed to make hamotzi, you decided to make a mezainis, so it's not even pashti yaitza, because some poskim hold if Chazal gave a chiyuv of making hamotzi on bread, so anything less than that, even though mezainis is like yesh b'cham b'sayimona, but if you're supposed to make hamotzi, you're not yaitza with mezainis. But Baruch Hashem, we paskin that lemaisa mezainis is not as good as hamotzi, but good enough b'di'evet. But we're not b'di'evet yidin. Let's say fakert. Let's say it's supposed to be a mezainis, and you're making a hamotzi. Oh, now you made too big of a bracha. And again, many poskim hold you're not yaitza. You can't make a hadama on a shackle. So how do you make a hamotzi on mezainis? So here also some poskim hold that since the ma'aseh v'kevei yisuda, it has a potential hamotzi. Again, b'di'evet. So number 1, we have the bracha. Number 2, if you're supposed to make a matzoh and you make a mezainis, let's say on French toast or matzah brei, so obviously you're not going to wash until it's yadayim because you're making a mezainis. But if it's really supposed to be a matzoh lechem in aretz, you have to wash. You're mevatel a mitzvah d'rabbanan and you're eating below bracha. Third and most severe is if it's supposed to be a matzoh and you make a mezainis, so you're obviously not going to bench on a mezainis, you're making al nichya. And you're mevatel a mitzvah d'raisa, chiv d'raisa of birchas hamazon of 3 brachas. The fourth nafkamina, which is very common, let's say you decide to make a mezainis on matzah brei, and it really is supposed to be a matzoh or a French toast. So what are you going to do after you make a mezainis on your French toast or matzah brei? You're going to have French fries. You're going to make an adama. You're going to have a drink. You're going to make a shackle. Those brachas were unnecessary. You should have made a matzoh and potted everything. You decided to make a mezainis, mistake number 1. Then you're making other brachas. So it's again a very serious shaila. So let's think in svar. Let's think about you take a piece of bread or matzah and you make breadcrumbs or matzah meal. Now, I want to say this once and for all. We live in a world of olam hasheker. You buy breadcrumbs, it's a very nice product, the flavored breadcrumbs, in fact, but doesn't come from bread. It's not breadcrumbs. It is specially made type of topping, which is very good, and but it's not bread. It doesn't come from bread. So breadcrumbs, typically commercially made breadcrumbs, are a brei min mezainis b'li safek. I'm talking about real McCoy breadcrumbs. Or matzah meal typically is matzah that's ground up. It's the meal of matzah. Meal is the Yiddish word. It's like matzah flour. So let's talk about real breadcrumbs and real matzah meal. They came from regular bread. Why should I think that the bracha changed just because you ground them? Oh, but wait a second. Maybe we just like if you take a piece of corn, and you grind it, you make it into corn flour. Corn flour is a shackle. If you make cornbread or corn muffins from pure corn meal, corn flour, the bracha is a shackle. Because you totally transformed it when you made it into a powder. Now, I should mention that almost all commercial corn muffins are mezainis because they add a significant amount of flour, l'svoya. That's just agav. But if you make from corn flour, you make corn muffins or cornbread, pure corn, it's a shackle in Bavari. So maybe that would be a reason that once you made it into a matzah meal, and then you made it into knelach, so it's not a moitzi because it's oisa moitzi. We'll soon see that's not true because it's a very simple chiluk. When you take a fruit or vegetable, you're supposed to eat it as it is, and you made it, you pulverized it, you pureed it, you made it into a powder like corn flour, you ruined it. That's not the regular use of a vegetable or fruit. So the bracha goes down. But raise a pella. When you take a kernel of wheat and you roast it and eat it as it is, what's the bracha? Bar piadam, achit tekluya. When you made it into a flour, you can either make a mezainis or a moitzi. What's that? Because flour is unique that the more you prepare it, the better bracha it becomes. Flour is supposed to be made into a powder, and then you can make farina, and you can make lakshin, you can make cake, and you make bread, you can make a matzah. So making it into a powder elevates it, doesn't demote it. And that's why probably the Rashba in Masechta Brachas Daf Lamed Zayin, he says when something is hamotzi, and his example is crumbs, breadcrumbs, ein ha-bracha nishtanis bein shir lepachas mishir. When something was bread or some matzah and you totally transformed it, it doesn't change because it's mikara matzah v'hashta matzah. Now his svar is ein ha-bracha nishtanis. Now the truth is the Rashba does not spell out that you made it into a matzah meal flour. Maybe he's talking about breadcrumbs. So that could be, but you look in the Torah, in our simon, today our simon is Kuf Sam Baches. The Torah says explicitly, if breadcrumbs are not cooked or baked, we'll soon see about the baked part. But if it's not cooked, it's mefurer, even though it's loitoya lechem, it no longer resembles bread. You took matzah, made it the matzah meal. So the truth is, Pesach matzah meal is brown from the matzah, so you could tell. But if you take regular, chametz tikka matzah and make it into a powder, you can't tell. We can't tell what it is. So that's what the Torah says. Even though it no longer resembles bread or matzah, the Rav Shulchan Aruch spells it out even further, and he says, "Afilu al pirur echad dak." You take a one single bit, a speck of bread, you make a matzoh lechem and aretz. And the Mishnah Berurah follows this, and the Mishnah Berurah says, "I feel the perum dakin kisoiles." You take a little speck of matzah meal. You barely could see it. You have to make a matzoh lechem and aretz. Why? Because nothing changed. So let's get practical. If someone's on a very strict diet and he goes to work or yeshiva and he takes along a snack, one breadcrumb. So he would have to wash, even though the Shulchan Aruch says that you don't wash less than a kazayis, but Mr. Berurah quotes days that you should wash. No bracha. Okay, washing is optional. Mr. Burtaki seems so you do wash, you make hamotzi, and no birchas hamazon. Fine. So here we have this yisoid established, and again, our sugya is 3 seifim in kuf samaches, and this is seif tes, and one works with the other. Bread or matzah, if it was changed totally into a powder, puree, the bracha is still hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Again, it's different than corn or other fruits and vegetables because by wheat products, the process is grinding it and using it. So now the question is, where do we go from here? So what does change matzah or bread if lemaisi was hamotzi? So here we come today again to just about 2 lines of the Mechaba, and that's Sif Yud, which is probably the ikka for today. And basically, the Mechaba says chavitza, which we're going to teach as crumbs, pieces of bread. And don't forget, in halacha, crumbs is lav dafka crumbs. Anything less than a kazayis has a halacha of crumbs. So here's what the Mechaba says, and it puts it very beautifully. Now, if you cook bread or breadcrumbs, so the Mechaba says it depends. If there's a kazayis, you cooked a piece of bread, even if it was cooked and there's no longer teresa than a hama. But if there's a kazayis remaining, a kazayis of bread never loses its status as bread, and it's a moitzi lechem in aretz. And as the Mechaba says, af al pi she'ein bei toya lechem, mevarach hamoitzi u'birchas hamazon. Zok the Mishnah Bura, kiven the yeshbem kazayis, loy nizbatel mimenu shem lechem. So rule number 1, as clear as day, is bread or matzah that's still a kazayis, even though you cooked it, you make a moitzi lechem and aretz. Now, what's taka the chiddush? Who said cooking should make it ois hamoitzi? There is very pashut. As we said earlier, what is the defining factor of bread? Baking. If you cook something, lakshin, or you cook farina, it's never shach to be a moitzi. So here the Paiskim are saying, if you take a bread and you cooked it, maybe that changed it. Because you took a cooked and you baked it. You took a bake and you cooked it. But if there's a kazayis remaining, nothing changes. The same Shulchan Aruch says, if there's no kazayis and you cooked it, this is important, even though it has toya lechem, it has suras tapas, it has teresa denahama, but less than a kazayis that's cooked, the bracha becomes brei minie mezainis. What's the chilik between a kazayis and less? So I didn't find the first. Could be it's pashit, because a kazayis of bread has very much chashivas. First of all, on a kazayis you have to bench, on a kazayis, even if there's no svia, but you have to bench, midabanan. Number 2, on a kazayis you can be yoitza mitzvah, matzah, samachila bekazayis. On a kazayis like the gra, you have to wash kazayim with a bracha, ulididan, at least without a bracha. Hilchas tuma very much is totally in kazayis, stam achila kazayis. So here is the yisoid mamish in one line. Bread that's cooked might lose its bracha because cooking is the opposite of bread. So here's the line. Bread that's cooked and is a kazayis is automatically moitzi. Nothing to talk about. Cooked less than a kazayis, automatically a mezainis, even if it has teresa denahama. So bread that's cooked and is a kazayis, even no teresa denahama, is a moitzi. A kazayis is a done deal. Less than kazayis that's cooked is an mezainis, even if there's teresa denahama. Now the Mishnah Bura, as we'll soon see, adds one more factor, and that is, how about if it wasn't cooked, but it was changed and has no teresa denahama? We'll soon see. That's also a factor. But let's chazer over, and then we'll talk halacha l'maisa. Number 1, cooked bread might lose its bracha, and depends on size. So we have 2 factors: cooked and size. And also, teresa denahama is lacking teresa denahama. That's also a reason that it becomes a mezainis. Now we have enough time to discuss the whole sugya. So let's start with a Tosfos in brachas lamed zayin with beis. Tosfos says that, what does it mean? The Gemara says it has to have teresa denahama. What does teresa denahama mean? So Tosfos gives one example. If you take bread and put it and soak it in water for long enough, the water starts to become white. So why is the water whitening? Obviously, the bread is changing its whole matzoh. So the soaking bread and the water turns white, that's a raya. The bread no longer has tzuras apas. And Tosfos gives an illustration. He says, Tosfos, one of the balei atois, one of the rishonim balei atois, Rabbi David we met. He had a yeshiva, he had a shir, and he had to give a shir. Now, obviously, his time was very limited. The half a minute was a lot of time in his life, and he didn't have the time from davening to give a shir to have a regular breakfast. I guess he wanted to have some of the skula of pas shachris. So how do you have pas shachris without washing and benching? Because he didn't have the time to wash and bench. So he used to take breadcrumbs the night before, soak it in water, and then the next morning, I don't know if he drank the water, whatever it was, but he had those breadcrumbs that was soaked in water, and he made a mezainis and alamichya because it was soaked overnight. It lost its teresa de nahama. Now, what do we see? Something very, very important. When something lost its teresa de nahama, it's no longer hamotzi. I'll be alarmed and say, well, maybe the reason why it's a mezainis is because since he soaked it, kavish kimavushal. Kavish kimavushal, zicha is only mezainis because bishul takes away the shem hamotzi, right? Wrong. Because Tosfos beferish, he soaked it the night before and he ate the next morning. He didn't sleep for, like they say, 2 bagels. He didn't sleep 24 hours. When is kavish kimavushal? Only 24 hours. So here we have one of the balei Tosfos that made the first legitimate mezainis. I don't say mezainis bread, mezainis crumbs, but it was legitimate. And the bracha would be a mezainis and alamichya. And what's the svara? Because it's lacking teresa de naham. And this is Sif Yud Aleph and Shulchan Aruch. Yesh mi she'omer, but we pass like that. Pirurim shenishtana b'mayim, dahainu, kshe'ein bem kazayis, and it lost its teresa de nahama, that would be a mezainis. For the same money, why don't you soak it in water, a big piece, and eat like a mensch? Teretz is, we said before, when somebody's kazayis, even if you cooked it, and no teresa de nahama, it's a moitzi. Kolshkein, if you soaked it. Now, Lamaisa, I just want to make a point that has to be mentioned. This is an oilam that still appreciates washing and benching. We live in a dar, no one has time to wash and bench. There's an aversion to wash and bench. And I don't know it's a schus, you wash, till sedayim is a mitzvah d'rabbanan, you bench, it's a deraisa, and I believe if you bench, and you say, Rachim, if you still have parents, Yavarach is avimayo ime mirasi, I think it's a mitzvah d'raisa, keep it avayim. Well, how do I know that? Because the Magen Avraham says, if the Gabi makes a mishaber for someone, you say amen, you have a mitzvah after kamoicha, because you're reinforcing the Gabi's bracha. So if you give your parent a bracha, isn't that a mitzvah of kibbut avei? I didn't find it beferish, but it's mistavra. But anyhow, washing and benching should be done unless you're a super master like a Beinu David Mimitz, fine. But the aversion to wash and bench, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it has to be stopped. It's a schus to wash and bench, but Beinu David didn't have an alternative, so he shouldn't be a precedent. I see he also didn't want to wash and bench. He couldn't do it. Pashut, he couldn't do it. Okay. So this is l'chayra simple. So we have sif tests regarding matzoh crumbs, breadcrumbs, is a moitzi unless changed. Sif yud is cooking, and then totally in kazayis and not. And sif yud aleph is no teresa de nahama, less than the kazayis, the bracha is the mezainis. Okay. Now, how about French toast? So those not familiar, you take a piece of bread, you dip it in eggs, whatever, and you fry it. What bracha is regular French toast? So lemaisa, this is simple. If the piece of French toast is a kazayis or more, then forget about your whole story. It's not negeya. Kazayis never loses shem pas. Now, a kazayis is not so big. A kazayis is, the way the poskim say, if you don't hold of the yishurim changing, a quarter of a slice of rye bread. A kabeya is a half slice of rye bread. It's a kazayis is a chatzi beya. So try to visualize a chicken's egg. Half of that is a kazayis. A kabeya is no big chiddush. A kabeya, an egg. Picture an egg, that's a kabeya. So again, a good approximation, a quarter slice of rye bread, the center slice, there's a 2 pound and not 1 pound rye, is a kazayis. So if you make French toast out l'chayra, out of anything more than a quarter of a slice of bread, it's vadai hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Now, the question is, let's say you make it on less than a kazayis of bread. So here the question is, how are you making it? If you deep fry it, that means you put the piece of French toast into boiling oil. So we mentioned once, the Zalman says it in the Shmir Shabbos, that mali bishul b'mayim, mali bishul b'shemen. If you cooked it in deep fry, it means you're cooking it in oil. Like in French fries, it's cooked in the oil itself. So that's bishul. So that would be a legitimate mezainis. Again, it has to be small. You deep fry it, so you cooked bread. No, the Mechaber says in Sifyud, cooked bread less than a kazayis, even if it has 2 sanhama, is a brei mina mezainis. So that, again, would be a legitimate, if someone has to travel, he wants to has bread, but he can't wash and bench, there's no water available, whatever it is, that would be a legitimate brei mina mezainis. Now, again, I'm not a cook, but I don't know if it's going to work. Maybe you put the bread with the egg topping and deep fry it. Maybe it won't come out good. I don't know. But more often than not, we don't deep fry it, you fry it. So now the question is, what is the status of a fried object, a fried item? So the Ramah in Sif Yud Daled says beferish, if you fry something with very little oil, just it shouldn't burn. In fact, today they have a spray, you don't have to use oil. But the oil is just there, it shouldn't burn. So the Ramah says that's not considered bishul, for sure. So little oil, that's considered afiyah, or because it's only the medium of heat. You're not cooking it anything. So the Ramah says that ma'at mashke is not considered a mashke in this respect. So if you put very little oil, or you use a spray, and you fried the French toast, even if it's a half a kazayah, less than half a kazayah, that would be like rebaking it, but it's not cooking. How about if it's what was called pan-fried? So pan-fried means that you use more oil than you really need, it shouldn't burn. But like people do, especially the young children that like the taste of oil and they're not worried about cholesterol. So they put in a lot of oil and it's splattering and it comes out more oil than the eggs. But the maisa, that's what's called pan-fried, more oil. And the Mishnah Berurah Taka says that this is a machloikis, Magen Avraham and other poskim. And he says we have to treat pan-fried like a suffix bishul and suffix just baking, because it's not enough oil. So that's why if you deep fry a French toast less than a kazayis, it's taka legitimate mezainis. If you pan fry it, or certainly if you stam fry it with very little oil, it's a regular hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Now, lamaisa, this is why it's not very practical, but I would mention Rabbi Zalman it was tshuva in 2 places. Grad for our sugi, it's important to mention the Mamakoyim is in the back of a saying bracha ois yud. The Mechaber quoted Rabbi Zalman and he wrote it down. Rabbi Zalman agreed to what was written. That's why it's legitimate. And also in the Sefer Birchas Nenen, on the Kufay Yal, Rabbi Zalman's nephew also heard it from Rabbi Zalman that if you want to make a French toast mashal, that should be a legitimate mezainis, and you can't deep fry it. The eighth is take a piece of bread less than a kazayis, cook it in water for just about a moment. The cooking is mafkiya the shem bread that we said. Everybody agrees. Then take it out. If you want, you can squeeze out the water, and then you could make it any recipe you like. Because once you reduce that less than a kazayis by cooking it, is ois hamotzi. Then you can make regular French toast and take it on your trip and make a mezainis and ala michya. But more than this particular application, it's the side of it. When you legitimately cook something, we'll soon see what that means, it loses its shem pas. So Lamaisa, these are the Lamaisa eitzes for a shasat chak. You make less than a kazayis, less than a quarter of a slice of bread. You could either deep fry it if that's shaykh, or certainly if you put it in water and then you fry it. Matzoh brei used to be, even for those that don't eat gebrakt, so at least matzoh Pesach, it was after you put away all the dishes and it was a stickle of a incentive to work hard, you make matzoh brei. Now those that make it on Pesach, whatever it is, matzoh brei basically is a matzah that's made in small pieces, and you add eggs, and you make a food out of it. I remember it used to be like after you clean up, it was like you look forward to that. Today there was something that misplaced this very nice attraction. It's called Tana Rishon Pizza. So that took over for the matzah brei. But anyhow, Lamaisa matzah brei used to be something of a delicacy. But anyhow, the question is, what bracha do you make on matzah brei? So this is mamish our sugya. If you make the piece of matzah more than a kazayis, there's nothing to talk about, no matter what you do. If it's less than kazayis pieces, so now the shaila is, maybe that's the mezainis. But the way the Mishnah Berurah says, if you pan fry it, it's a suffix hamotzi. See, that's not an eitzah. It's totally in a big machlokes. And I don't know if it's even shach to use very little oil, but very little oil is even less of a shaila, because that's zichafiyah. So this is why the Paiskim say that basically the matzah brei has less than a kazayis, and even if it's more kazayis, even more pashit, it would be a moitzi lechem and art. Now here again, Rabbi Zalman said, if you want to have a real mezainis matzah brei, the eitz is make it into pieces less than a kazayis and cook it. That's right. And the emes is people that make matzah brei properly, they don't just crumble it and they fry it. You typically soak it in water until it gets softer, should be more workable. No, so if you're soaking in the water for the same money, put water in a pot and cook the matzah for a moment, and then you have a vadai mezainis. So this is why it is shaykh to make matzah brei. Again, it involves the stage of cooking. Cooking makes it a no shaila because it's ois bread. Now, the Shevet HaLevi Chelik Zayin Simon Chav Zayin Sivkot and Daled was asked about matzah brok, which is matzah brei. He says, I know what the suffix is. It's totally in what we learned. See if you. But then he says, maybe chashafti, maybe is another reason to be makel. Maybe even if you pan fry it, maybe you can make a mezainis. Mr. Berurah says it's a suffix, and we don't play around with tzveikas. Zok the Shevet HaLevi, because there is a sheet, and that's the minig of Achenu Asvardim, that matzah, regular matzah, is mezainis. It's only on Pesach they make a moitzi, because that's the lechem of the chag. But regular matzah for Sfardi is mezainis. So maybe we'll make it like a svek. First of all, maybe it's a mezainis to start, matzah, even a big piece. And even if not, pan fried is a suffix, that maybe it is bishul. So then it concludes, but mistapina, I'm afraid to say this, and I know exactly why. Because Ashkenazim use matzah as a bread. For shalashudis, for lechem mishnah, but it's very commonly used as a bread. Now that you're deciding you're considering matzah like a snack, oh, that's good for today. And what about Shabbos and Shalshudis and Shul? You make a moitzi on matzah. You're not consistent. So basically, the Tartar is Asri. And Taka, I saw in the Sefer Pischei Halacha, Perek Chesed Ora 108, he quotes Chaim Kanievsky, that you don't use that as a tzad lahakol that matzah's mezainis, because we don't make a mezainis unless you become a Sfardi. But it's not a tzad. But I did see the Marsham in the Tshuvas Chelik Chesim and Pei Aleph speaks about matzah brei, and he says the way to do it that we'll soon see that is a Challah Deis, and then he says, but maybe you are mitzaref also that matzah is not a moitzi, is mezainis. Okay, so Marsham said it, but for us it's hard to take that approach, because then we are implying that we hold it's mezainis. You can use it for shalashudis or for lechem mishnah. Now the Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Lamed Zayin, he calls it tegachts, but it's also what we call matzah brei, and he says matzah brei has a different side to makel. It lost its Teresa de Nahama, so less than a kazayis, and lost Teresa de Nahama, that would be a good het. Now all the Heintige Paiskim wonder, is this Metzias that we have? If you make matzah brei, it does that. You could see it. It's mamish. You could see the matzah. I saw the Hilchas Yoim at Maish Mordechai Amid Tov Mem Hey. Taka says, I don't understand it. He says, I heard from older people that they used to make matzah something like from matzah meal. The matzah brei was matzah meal? No, if that's the case, okay. But if our matzah is noticeable, even though it's broken to smaller pieces, it does have Teresa de Nahama. But Lamaisa, as we said, matzah brei should be treated as a hamoitzi, unless you cooked the piece of bread for a moment or more, and it made it ois hamoitzi, and then you made it from a mezainis to a better mezainis. A little of a more challenging issue is challah kugel. Challah kugel was always very common because it was leftover challah, and what do you do with it? I say for today, it's not so popular. The Bagel never heard of challah kugel for two reasons. Number one, today if you have leftover bread, challah, what do you do with it? Laida, throw it out. Or idach gisa, today we have so many dips, there's no leftover challah. Whatever the case is, it's becoming sort of an ancient minig. But challah kugel was taking all the old challah and bread and processing, we'll soon see how, and you made it into a challah kugel. So what does that mean, processing? So basically, you took the challah, soaked it in water, and then you squeezed out the water, and you made a sort of a dough, we'll call it a dough, and you baked it. And it was something like a lakshin kugel, I mean, of course different, but the same idea. It was a baked challah, called a challah dough that was sort of refurbished. The bread was soaked, squeezed the water out, and you made it into a challah kugel. So the mice, if you soaked long enough small pieces of the challah, and or if you cooked small pieces of the challah, so then it was ice hamotzi, it's ice bread, and then you squeezed it out and you made a dough. But here's the problem. Because once you put it together as a dough and you baked it, that might recreate it as a hamotzi. And Mishnah Berurah Taka says, if you take the challah, you soak it in water, and then you add eggs, whatever, and you put in the oven, yeshlam din pas gomor. Obviously, when you're rebaking it, it's like you're taking little crumbs and making it into bread. And this is the shita of the Paiskim say that if it has a toya lechem, and typically challah kugel does sound like it, that it has a toya lechem, if it is baked, it should be a hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And back to Chazei Nish, and I saw the Pischei Halacha points to the Chazei Nish that says in the Farish in Siman Chavav, the end of Sivkot and Tes, that when you rebake a new dough, it's like it's the first time, and it becomes a hamotzi lechem min haaretz. However, very often the challah kugel is heavily flavored. You add sugar, cinnamon, raisins, or anything that gives it a heavy flavor. So that's like a cake. The best mashal, I think, that really highlights the point. Kokish cake has the exact same dough like challah, and yet it's a mezainis. Even the end piece. Why? Because it was made as a sweet food, as a snack. It's not a bread. You don't eat tuna fish with kokish cake. So if you make the challah kugel as a lakshin kugel type of thing, for that reason the flavoring makes it ois hamotzi. So then, even though it has it's like a dough. A dough is still, if you made it to kokish, it's a brei min mezainis. So this, the Mishnah Berurah actually says it in Sivkot Nun Tes. He says, but if you bake the challah kugel, it's hamotzi, unless you nilish with harbe shemen or dvash, then it becomes like a pasah babakist. And Taka the Paiskim say that this would be no different than a regular cake that is basically a real hamotzi, but if you made it as a non-bread food, the ingredients significantly changes its identity. And Taka the Paiskim say that, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, in the Tshuva Taka Sif Yud of the Tshuvas in the back of the same bracha, if you make a regular kugel, that lamaisa, that you add shemen and eggs and or juice, that would be a brei minej mezainis. Rabbi Yashiv was a little weary of it because the ma'isa comes from bread, so he says the best eitzah would be, this is typical Rabbi Yashiv, to soak the bread not just in water, soak it in mei peris, in juice. So when you do that, it really gives a major change to the identity of the bread, and then you bake it, it becomes a brei minej mezainis because of the flavoring of it. What I found gishmak, the Paiskim discuss, I don't think you see this today, but some people made the same challah dough. They took a small piece of challah, soaked it in water, made it into we'll call it a dough, and didn't bake it. They put it into the kishka, as a kishka. They put it into the challah as a kishka, and then they wrapped it up. So instead of making a dough and then baking it and making it a challah kugel, They took that same recreated dough, put it in aluminum foil, put it into the cholent, and that was their kishka. What's the halacha with that? So that has a chap, because if it was less than a kazayis and that was soaked, so really it should be a mezainis. Navas, if you bake it, so you create it as a moitzi, but this quote kishka was not baked. It was cooked. It was cooked with the heat, with the moisture of the cholent. That you submerge it and it cooks. So this type of situation where you cooked the challah kugel, quote unquote, as a kishka, that would be a brei minie mezainis. So that's basically challah kugel. It should be typical. If it's baked, it's a moitzi, unless you do something making in the dough, in the flavoring of the dough. And if it's cooked, so that would stay a brei minie mezainis. Now, lemaisa, the next questions is the beautiful part of the sugya is using matzoh or challah crumbs. Again, we're talking about real matzoh crumbs and real challah crumbs, not the bread crumbs. So lemaisa, as we said, and this is l'chayr pashit, that lemaisa, when something was made into a breadcrumb, we saw the Rashba, we saw Sif Tes, that is a vadai hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Now, someone asked me that he has, now typically challah crumbs on Shabbos is very common. The Chassam Sofer says you're supposed to eat the challah crumbs, but there's no shayla because you washed anyhow. The question is, he has all the leftover challah crumbs from Shabbos, and now it's Sunday night. He's not washing, and he didn't want to throw it out. It's about maybe baltashkas. Why should he throw it out? So he has a good idea. He's having hot soup, hot chicken soup Sunday night, leftovers from Shabbos. He'll put the crumbs into the soup. What bracha to make on those crumbs? So he thought, well, once you cook crumbs less than a kazayis, then automatically becomes a mezainis. But he's making a mistake. Mr. Bura in Sif Kot Nun Bey spells it out that if something is cooked, it becomes mezainis. It has to be cooked al pi halacha. Cooking al pi halacha is only kli rishon al gabe eish, or if you took it off the fire, but it's still hot enough, so kli rishon has the capacity of cooking even shlei al gabe eish. So when he say in the Shulchan Aruch, it's cooked, it means halachically cooked. Either kli rishon al gabe eish or kli rishon shlei al gabe eish is still very hot. A bowl of soup, l'chol hapachis, is a kli sheni. If you're a real bar mazel, you'll probably get a kli revi, because they put it into the serving bowl and then a ladle, and then you get to your bowl, so that's a kli revi. But there's no way you could get it soup in a bowl that's not a kli sheni. And that's why Mr. Brewer says kli sheni does not have the din of bishul. So it's regular crumbs, shaloyin is bashul. And that, l'chor, those breadcrumbs should be a moitzi lechem in aretz. Now, the poskim did not discuss, I'm not sure why, but let's say Taka put it into your hot bowl of soup as a kli sheni. But now, lemaisa, after you did that, the breadcrumbs are very heavily flavored from a chicken soup. So is that enough to make it ois hamoitzi, because now it has that distinct flavor of the soup? No one says this, I'm not sure why, but it would make sense that if you take at the breadcrumbs before you eat it, it's like, it would be like a challah kugel that's very heavily flavored. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think that's what makes sense. But that would be a reason why, if again, is totally changed. Now, if you consider it that it's like heavily flavored, that might be a factor to make it a mezainis. But again, no one says that, I'm not sure why. Someone asked me this, and I kid you not, he wants to know what bracha to make on chopped liver on Sunday night. I says, the same bracha like Monday night. So he said, no, my house is different. Why? Because we have chopped liver by the table, Shabbos Suda, and the children, they're uncouth, whatever, but they take the chal, they dip it into the liver, and they take out the liver. He says, so he told me, like Shtigel Amden, he says, it's a psik reish, there's crumbs in the liver. Okay, so Lamaisa, he's probably right in the Yesod that there's crumbs there, and those crumbs are not like significantly changed like in a hot soup, but Lamaisa, we have a toises in the end of Lam Mavav Mabei. Toises says that even though Yeshbei Chamesh Mina Dagan is automatically a mezainis, it's only if mezainis is there either for taste or l'svoya. If you add flour to a clear chicken soup to give it a little more texture, to make it a little thicken it, so toises the bracha on the soup is not a mezainis. Yeshbei Chamesh Mina Dagan, but you're only putting the flour there to thicken it, not to give it taste or l'svoya. So it's like a hechatimtza. that type of flour is batel. That's why on licorice, even though there's 30% flour, but the flour is there ledabek to hold it together, it's a shahako. That's why on gefilte fish and meatballs, although there is some mezainis added, it's only to hold it together, to give it body. So Lamaisa, his psik reisha liver on Sunday night is zicha not kavanas achila. So even though it's taka a breadcrumb that should be a moitzi in theory, but zicha not in practice, because Lamaisa it's not there l'svaya. Now the next question is fascinating because you live and learn. Who would think of this? But Lamaisa, the question is when you make kneidlach, what bracha is it? Now kneidlach again comes from ground matzoh meal, and I was told by a mumcha that the kneidlach have a certain texture only because it's matzah. If you take flour and try to create your own, it won't be the same. The matzah sticks together. He told me a whole science of it. He's a professional cook. But at the end of the day, the matzah ball soup, the goyim call it, because it has a certain taste that it's matzah that's ground. So I'm talking about real matzah that was made into kneidlach. So Lamaisa, here's the question. L'chayra, this is pashut. Because once matzah was a crumb, l'chayra, it should be a perfect hamotzi lechem in haaretz, because a crumb remains a crumb. Now I want to make a point. I have to mention this. The Mishkanis Yakov in the Tshuva, Simon Sadik Dalet, and the Meshivas Nefesh, the Plotzke Goyin in the Tshuva, beautiful Tshuva, Simon Dalet, they both say that really, you look at the Rashba, he doesn't say that matzah flour or bread flour is still a moitzi. He says a breadcrumb. They both are mechavan on their own that if you made it into a powder, that is so nishtana tzurasai, it lost the shem moitzi. So that might be somewhat of relief when you're dealing with real ground matzah. But what should I tell you? The Torah says beferish, mefora dak kesoilis. The Rav says it, Mr. Bura says it. So he could argue on whoever he wants, but Lamaisa, we have the Mr. Bura and the Rav, both are Gedalia Paiskim, that say even if it's mamish a powder, it's totally unrecognizable. Bread is bread. So now we're back to our problem. What do we do with kneidlach? So Lamaisa, listen to this simple but beautiful point. Let's talk about a kneidl that you take matzah meal and you put in whatever little ingredients and you typically bake it, which really you don't, but in your case you bake it. What bracha would you make on a baked kneidl? Vadei hamoitzi. Why? Because before you baked it, you had crumbs that were hamoitzi. Matzah crumbs are hamoitzi. Now you baked it, it didn't go worse. So all agree, Mr. Bura says it, all Paiskim say it, baked kneidlach is a hamoitzi lechem and haaretz, even if it's less than a kazayis. Because Lamaisa, the crumbs themselves are a hamoitzi. Again, if you make it heavily flavored, that's something else, but we're talking about typical kneidlach are not heavily flavored. Zok the Magen Avram, listen to this. Magen Avram is Sivka and Chav Ches. Magen Avram says as you took bread, matzah crumbs, matzah meal, and you made it into a ball, right? And you cooked it. Zok the Magen Avram, it's vaita hamoitzi lechem and haaretz. Because once you made it into a ball, so now it's a prum sheyesh by kazayis. Now we know once you cook a kazayis, it doesn't help, doesn't change. So Tainit the Magen Avram, he says, we paskin that a kazayis that's cooked never loses shem hamoitzi. So a kneidl, first you made it into a ball of kazayis, and then you cooked it, so it remains a moitzi lechem in haaretz. And this is the shita of Adeinenu Magen Avram, that even if there's no Teresa de Nahama, but a cooked kazayis of bread is a moitzi lechem in haaretz. Case closed. And that's what the Magen Avram tain is. He says, we paskin, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, a kazayis, even if there's no teyah lechem, is a moitzi. What's the shayla? So this is why, no doubt about it, the Chasam Sofer is quoted in Hagich Chasam Sofer in Perek Yud Sif Chavav, that if you know, Chasam Sofer always had Kiddush Makom Suda Shabbos morning, and he didn't have cake. He didn't want to have cake. Maybe he didn't want the sweets. I don't know why, but he had every Shabbos. He had Kiddush Makom Suda. He had kneidlach, but he was makbid to have 2 or 3 kneidlach. But he was makbid they should be made less than a kazayis. State, and everybody knows that. The Chasam Sofer was makbid not to have a knedel that's more than a kazayis, because it's a Hamotzi. However, Mr. Bura, in something very interesting, the way he puts it, in Sif Katan and Test, look what the Magen Avram writes. He doesn't say what he writes, but Haskamas Harbi Achroinim, and that's Even Oizer, Shar Tshuva, Chayoda, Magni Boyrim, Meshivas Nafesh, is that on Knedach you make a mezainis. So he basically says, look at the Magen Avram. I didn't even mention it because it was so ugefrekt in his eyes. But the Achroinim hold on a knedel is a mezainis. Now it's a pella. Magen Avram is right. Now I'll tell you another tzad, and that also sounds right. Zok der Chashulchan and Sif Lamed Zayin, he brings the Magen Avram, Dvarim Temuim. He said, I don't understand Magen Avram. Who doesn't know? Every child knows that that something that's less than a kazayis, and then you cooked it, the bracha is bari min mezainis. So how could knedach be a moitzi? You see, he held before it became one by cooking. The cooking impacted the crumbs and made crumbs less than a kazayis. Cooked. What's the halacha less than a kazayis? Bari min mezainis. And you didn't rebake it, so you're cooking regular crumbs less than a kazayis. The Chashulchan says this, but it's interesting. The Even Oizer, he breaks it down scientifically, because before it becomes one as one kazayis knedel, so the cooking affects each little piece of it. So each little piece became a less than a kazayis that's cooked. That's the end of the Challah. So that's why they all explain, if you make a knedel and you bake it, so you baked it into a kazayis, that's a ma'aseh menaretz. But if you made it into your matzoh ball raw and you cooked it, so Magen Avram says you're cooking a kazayis. It's a Hamotzi. Harbi Achroinim say wrong. Before it became a kazayis, it became cooked pieces of matzah. Cooked piece of matzah is a bari min mezainis, and nothing changes. So here you have that yisoid that all agree, if you would make a matzah ball, a knedel, more than a kazayis, and you bake it, it's Hamotzi lechem min aretz. Actually, even if you make it less than a kazayis, if it's baked is baked. But the focal point that's so negated to us is the typical matzah knedlach that are really a kazayis or more. The Magen Avram is Magen Avram, Chasam Sofer, but Mr. Bura says that Lamaisa it's a brei miני mezainis. He does add in nilash beroiv shemen oy dvash, and now is heavily flavored. There's another reason to say that it's a brei miני mezainis, and that is like a cake. But Lamaisa, of course, we don't flavor it with chocolate, whatever, sugar. But the point is, if it's taka heavily flavored, that's another svar to make them. But in the side of a knedel, is not so simple. There is a Magen Avram, Chasam Sofer was chayish for that, to be chayish that it might be Hamotzi lechem min aretz. So the Ma'aser, Mr. Bura says the minig, and that seems to be the way we paskin. And again, some people want to follow Chasam Sofer. I think you have to have a little of a mishkal chasidus to tell the wife, I want dafka small knedel, but it doesn't look nice. She wants to make a big knedel. So really making a big knedel like the Magen Avram is a problem. But if the Mr. Bura and so many poskim hold it's a mezainis, avada yesha milismech to make a bigger knedel and make a bari min mezainis. Someone wants to be chayish like a Chasam Sofer, make sure his family are also on board with that chumrah. Next question, which in a certain sense is much more intimidating, and that is what we call a Pesach cake. Actually, I would say is a gebrukt cake. I know that some people call it Pesach cake because they don't want to feel guilty to eating gebrukt. So they say it's Pesach cake. Some people call it gebrukt cake because that's what it is. But I'm talking about gebrukt cake, which is made from matzah meal and flavoring. So right away, the bell starts to ring because you're taking matzah meal and you're baking it. No one cooks gebrukt cake. So you're baking real McCoy Hamotzi. You're baking matzah meal. And that's why the poskim discuss what's the bracha. I saw two very beautiful tshuvas, the Beis Ephraim in Siman Yud Aleph and the Plotzke Goy that I mentioned earlier. And they both speak about this Ugoy's Pesach, the Pesach cake. And basically they say it really should be a Hamotzi lechem min aretz. But since there's so much flavoring added, so it's not worse than a kakish cake. Kugel cake is real flour and water, real dough, but it's not made as a bread. So therefore, the poskim seem to say non-gebrukt, so called Pesach cake, whatever you want, gebrukt cake or Pesach cake, however you call it, really if you make it into a very bland taste, you're making something like a bread, and it's baked. But typically we have flavoring added, and that's why both the Shivas Nefesh that I mentioned and the Beis Ephraim say it's taka mezainos, and that's the sheet of all poskim. Rabbi Yashiv was not so excited about this. He said because the Maisa matzah is matzah, but he also says that's the minig olam, and we follow that minig as well. So this is the matzah issue. I also saw a tshuva from the Avnei Yoshvei Chelik Aleph Siman Lamed Tesif Cotton Hay. I never saw that. He speaks about they have a chocolate matzah. Apparently they take matzah, they cover it with chocolate. So he says, Lamaisa, the matzah is unchanged. You know what it's like? It's like if someone takes bread and puts a half an inch of jelly, a half inch of peanut butter, and that was very sweet. But nothing changed in the matzah itself. If you cook it, if you bake it, if you cook it, that changes. But stam putting matzah on it doesn't change the metzias. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman discusses a beautiful shaila. It's a Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos for those that eat gebrukt. Can you eat a Pesach cake, a gebrukt cake, on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos? Because we don't eat anything has a trace of matzah in it, because the issa of eating matzah on Erev Pesach, right? But here's the question: since the ma'isa you make it, you make a mezainis, and you consider it ois matzah because you changed it. Maybe it changes enough that it could be actually that's no longer matzah. So avada something that's more matzah-dik like knedlach we don't eat because they're the matzah. Potentially could even be Hamotzi lechem in Aretz. But he seems to be comfortable that this would be enough of a change that those that eat gebruks can have it on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. The last group of questions are the heintige shal, so to speak, and basically it's very simple once we know the yesodis. The simplest shaila is mandolin, yellow, we call them yellow, mandolin, called crouton mandolin, but the real name is mandolin, which are basically made from a dough. It has nothing to do with bread. They didn't make a bread and take it and color it yellow. They basically made whatever they made the batter, and those little yellow mandolin are deep fried. So there are two excellent reasons why mandolin are undoubtedly a mezainis. Number one, it's not bread, it's not matzah, so it's pashut a regular mezainis mixture. And number two, it's deep fried. So it's even if it had been a piece of bread, but deep fried is bishul. So the mandolin, the yellow mandolin, we'll call them avade mezainis b'li safek. The more of an issue is, lately it's started manufacturing more and more, it's called croutons. So croutons are made from bread or challah. You cut it into cubes and you rebake it with flavoring, and that's called crouton. I'll use the word mandolin versus croutons. Now, lamaisa, if you think about it objectively, nothing changed. It was bread, it is bread, there is absolute Teresa de Nahama. What's the problem? What's the shaila? And the emes is, there was a store here in our neighborhood, long before they sold croutons, this wonderful store made their own croutons. They had leftover challah that they didn't sell, leftover bread, so Sunday they had available croutons. And it was amazing, you could see, this is the crust of a challah, this is the crust of a rye bread, this is the bottom, this is the top. It was mamish, and they were very transparent. They said, listen, we took bread and we made it croutons. And the bracha is Hamotzi, without a doubt. There's nothing to talk about. Now, that didn't last too long, because now it became a whole big product. The new product is pretty similar with one major nafkamina. The new croutons that are made today is made from regular bread, but it's not made for bread, and then you get leftovers, and then you collect the leftovers and you make croutons. That would not be a good business. You can't make a product that's totally how much leftovers the stores have. So they make regular bread and they process it from that bread. What bracha would you make on those croutons that come from regular bread? So Pasha, what's the shaila? Bread is bread. However, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, and he's followed by other poskim as well, and they say, if the bread was made l'shem bread, to eat as bread, and you made it then into crouton, no. that's taka hamotzi. But if it never was made into a bread, it's only mid-process to make it into croutons, that would be a brei and mezainis. Now, I think the hezb is very pashut, because as we said many times, hamotzi versus mezainis is not totally in ingredients, because kakash cake dough is regular challah dough. It's totally in function. If you make it into a challah, it's hamotzi. You make it into a kakash cake snack, it's a mezainis. So it's totally in function. So if the function of bread is to eat as bread, and you have leftovers, you make it into a product, because on date, lemaisa, that's hamotzi. But if you make the bread for no purpose of eating, just to make it into a crouton, why was it Challah Hashem bread? There's no Hashem soifai, there is no soifai. But be that as it may, this is why you'll notice that I'm guessing, but I imagine it's true. They write birchasai mezainis. And that's under the hashgacha, and I hope they're responsible enough to write that because the badatz that gives the hechsha also certifies that it's a mezainis. If that's true, I understand why, because they would accept this understanding. If you made bread l'shem bread, it's hamotzi. You made bread l'shem croutons, and never Hashem bread. Now, Rabbi Yashiv is quoted, and Rabbi told me this as well, that mi gila lo yirazeh, who told you that? Well, you don't find such a thing in halacha. It's regular bread. See, if you make a very thick, dense bread, so then never Hashem bread. But this is regular bread. There's no different in its texture. So that's why you'll hear two shitas. I think the OU they tell people to make hamotzi. That's a Bel sack. But at least you can understand the different shitas. It's all our sugya. It was a bread, but never bread l'shem bread. Many people tell me they have a minik, whatever the word is, that Shabbos they have these croutons. It's like a more Shabbosdik, because you washed anyhow. And during the week you want to have croutons, you take the mandlin. So you avoid tzveikis, that's the halach. Bagel chips is mamash the same idea. When they started making it in pizza shops, and I think adayom, I was told that the pizza shops that make their own bagel chips from leftover bagels. So they slice the bagels, make it the chips, and they make the whatever they make, deep fry it, lamashal. It doesn't make a difference deep fry. If it's more than a kazayis, then a matzoh and aretz. Now the Heintiger commercial bagel chips, you could be certain they don't buy all the leftover bagels every day. Otherwise, you have a business that's going to be very unreliable. They make bagels, same story. Make bagels, l'shem bagel chips. So those that hold chalais bread is totally in its metzius. This is chalais bread. If it's totally in what it's designed for, this would be the same heta that was not made to be a actual piece of bagel that's eaten as a bread. Melba toast, again, you look at it, you see, it looks like a Teresa Nahama, but it was definitely transformed. It was made to make melba toast, and that would be the same mezainis. And last but not least, which is the most challenging, is garlic nuts. Garlic nuts, as I'm told, I did my homework, is exactly a regular pizza dough. But instead of making a pizza, they make it into a knot, and they make it garlicky, and it's sold. The person that knows the Messiah told me it's very rarely, if ever, deep fried. It is baked. Sometimes they deep fry it to get a little more flavor, but it's baked as a garlic knot. So it's a regular dough. But the reason why some say it's mezainis is, number one, it's roiv mei peris, so which is questionable, but at least that's one factor. And number two, the fact that it's so garlicky, it's no longer a bread. It's heavily flavored with garlic. In fact, not only after they make the dough, they dip it in garlic, but those that want to get a cutting edge on the market, they put garlic into the dough itself. So like a double knack of garlic. So that, again, more mistad would be a moitzi lechem and aretz, unless it's taken inedible as a bread, then it would be a snack. It's bari minim mezainis. I go to talk to you all.
Made with apple juice and milk.
Right, made pears, that's what we said. It's not more than right.
Shem Egan Shir tell like to be a character of Smith for today's share. I'd like to give a big character of Ruben Wolf, one of the board members of Egan Shir for sponsoring today's share with Nishmas Oviv, Rabbi Shmuel, Ben Ruven, Tchon Bracha, Yotzet Cheshvat, and Nishmas Tzur with Sarah Chaim. Of the great source of sponsoring a share, call Egan Shir at 718-851-8651. Vanani Menakash Shemet, is both of Zach, so we can Mitchell.
Amen.
Make it again, it doesn't make a difference. What do you say? There's no change from the Shia to the Sikkim. The Pasha Shenastana Sarasa.
Just to review today, first of all, these shilas should be taken seriously. We're talking about a question of making the wrong bracha, Hamotzi or mezonot, or vice versa, which is not Pasha, even Yaitza. The fact that he's not going to make until Zidai when he should, he's not going to bench, and also he'll make a bracha on other foods, Tayach Suda. So these shilas should be taken with, of course, with the right kovid roish to understand it's a serious shaila. But the basic klal, and it's pretty simple, cooked dough, or cooked bread actually, is almost a stira to bread. In other words, since hamotzi is based on the dough being baked, when something is cooked, it never had a shem hamotzi, and that's why bagel that's only cooked would be a mezainis. And that's the only time we're going to say that bread loses its shem bread when it's cooked. But even that is limited. So basically, on a breadcrumb that we know for sure, a breadcrumb or matzoh crumb is a moitzi. When you take a piece less than a kazayis of bread or matzah and you cook it, so that the bracha would be brei min mezainis, because it's enough of a change to change this small piece of bread. If you soaked a small piece of bread less than a kazayis in water, there's no teris and hama, then vaita it becomes ois bread, not because of the soaking, because it's not kavish, but because of the lack of teris and hama. Once something is a kazayis, nothing could change it. So French toast would be very rare to make a French toast halacha brei min mezainis unless you take a piece less than a kazayis. Either you deep fry it, or if you cook it first and then make French toast, and that would be a legitimate mezainis, alamichya, and grad. Even if you convey a suda, it wouldn't be a problem, because this is already a cooked food. Cooked food, there's no kviya suda. Deep fried is taka a bishul. Pan fried, very little oil is like afiyah. Pan fried with more oil than needed, but to give it some flavor, is a suffix if it's considered like cooked or not. Matzah brei is almost always hamotzi unless you cook the crumb, the piece of matzah first, then it would be a mezainis pieces. The point of matzah crumbs or breadcrumbs, we said, even though there is those that hold it doesn't have a teris and hama, but our poskim hold that breadcrumbs, even the smallest piece of matzah meal, is a vadai hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You made it into challah kugel. So challah kugel, typically, I think that's the minhag, you make a mezainis out of it, because either you soak it for a long time or cook the small piece of bread, or you make a heavy flavoring. But challah kugel that's baked, that wasn't affected by heavy flavoring, should be hamotzi lechem min haaretz. If you cooked the challah kugel, the hainu, you made it as a kishka in the challah, that also would be a mezainis, because it's considered cooked, not baked. The crumbs, as we said, even a little bit, even small pieces as a hamotzi, putting it in a hot soup in a klisheni, l'chayra, is a hamotzi, unless for some reason the taste changes so significantly. Crumbs that are found in liver, any foods, whatever it is, that's negligible, doesn't count. If you add crumbs l'svoya into a food, avada, then it would be taka hamotzi lechem and aretz. Kneidlach, the minig is to make a mezainis even on bigger than a kazayis, unless you bake it. The Chasam Sofer based on Magen Avraham was chayish to make it less than a kazayis. Gebrocht cake is always a mezainis. The yellow mandlin are a mezainis vaday. The croutons, again, there's two different shitas. It's kedai taka to have a teich suda. Bagel chips and melba toast we consider them as mezainis, even though bagel chips, if it's made from bagels, is somewhat of a suffix. And the garlic nuts should be treated like a moitzi, unless again it's heavily flavored, then it becomes a mezainis.